Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing stories of personal transformation and collective healing from people who have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire DeLaslo, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Our guest, Liz Butler, has a practice based on the idea that healing occurs when we can deepen our spiritual connection. She helps people with cancer and other serious illnesses connect to the wisdom held within our hearts. Informed by her training at the HeartMath Institute in California, she's created a pathway to release emotional pain and make way for physical healing, which she calls the Heart's Path. She's currently writing a book about the heart that unites physiology, psychology, and spirituality. Hello, Liz. Welcome to Cancer Talks.
Hi, Claire. Thank you for inviting me.
So I wanted to start with maybe just a bit of an introduction to how, as you would tell it, cancer came into your life.
Okay, well, if we're going right back to the beginning of the story, then I'd have to start when I was a child, because although I didn't know anyone with cancer as a child, I somehow had this great fear of the disease. And I don't know where that came from. Maybe I did have an encounter at some point that I can't remember. But all I do know is from a young age of maybe 7 or 8, I used to worry about getting cancer, and sometimes would imagine that a headache or a rash or something minor like that, I would tell myself I had cancer. And obviously my parents would reassure me, and even occasionally I might have been taken to the doctor, and there was never anything wrong. But I had this fear, and I just don't know where that came from. Anyway, time went on, and I think that got less as I got older. And then I was interested, again, from a young age of working in health in some way. Originally, I thought I would study medicine and become a doctor. But then in secondary school, I got very interested in nutrition. And so eventually thought perhaps that would be my path. I ended up studying biochemistry at university, which gave me a good grounding in the basic science, which really helped me with my nutrition, which I went on to study after my first degree. And it was towards the end of my nutrition studies that I got a job working for a supplement company here in the UK. And I was asked by the supplement company to go and speak to a cancer support group in the Midlands here in the UK. And I did that, and they wanted me to speak because they used the supplements from that company and they wanted a bit more information about them. So I went up. It was an evening talk. I drove up to this town in the Midlands, gave my presentation, and afterwards, they obviously enjoyed it. They said, well, we're actually looking for a nutritional therapist to come and speak to us on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. Would you be interested? Now, at that time, I hadn't actually qualified. I was in my final year of a 3-year diploma. So they knew that, but they were quite happy because I was about to graduate. So right at the beginning of my nutrition career, I found myself exposed to this group of people with cancer. I didn't really know anything about the disease, to be honest, other than little bits I'd learned at university or on my nutrition training course.
Because your training course was not cancer specific by any means.
No, it was general nutritional therapy.
Interesting.
And I was at that point, towards the end of my course, I was thinking, what areas would I like to specialize in? And cancer hadn't come into my mind at all, really. So when I went to see this group, I really enjoyed interacting with the people. They were a lovely group of people. And as I started going up there once a month and learning more about cancer, and at that point I did really throw myself into what can I learn about cancer, the disease, and also what can I learn about how nutrition can support people with cancer. As I started learning, I thought, wow, this is actually a really fascinating area to be involved in. So I'm going back 22 years, and around that time, there wasn't many nutritional therapists that were specialising in cancer support. And so that's probably why I hadn't really thought of it, because there was a lot of nutritional therapists supporting people with gut health or hormone health or maybe allergies. But cancer, I guess, was seen as an area that was complex. Obviously, it's a serious illness, so perhaps nutritional therapists shied away. But I think largely also at that point, there wasn't much awareness that diet and nutrition could support people with cancer. I mean, that seems mad now. Obviously, what you eat has an impact on any type of illness, because what we put into our body is so essential for our health and well-being. But it wasn't really talked about in terms of cancer recovery. However, that's where I found myself. And the more I worked with this group, the more I thought perhaps this is the area I would like to specialise in. And because there weren't many therapists doing this work, it meant that I sort of quickly got a bit of a name for myself, because there weren't many people doing it. So yeah, that's how I came to work in the cancer field, and I immediately enjoyed it for various reasons. One of them being that when you've been given a diagnosis of a serious disease like cancer, you are more likely to take any advice that a health practitioner may give you quite seriously. You're quite heavily invested in supporting and improving your health. And so people were really engaged with the sort of advice and support I was, which was nice, because it can be a bit disheartening when you spend a lot of time preparing and giving people advice, and then they don't really listen, or they don't follow what you've suggested. Whereas this group of people really were engaged, and that felt good to me. Also, cancer is an umbrella term, as we know, for many related diseases. And so there's a huge amount to learn, and you're never going to get bored. You're never going to think that you know it all when it comes to cancer, because it's such a huge area. So that I liked too. And also, what really struck me in terms of people diagnosed with cancer is they were often facing their mortality, and that causes people to reflect on the deeper meaning of life very often.
Yeah.
And I've always had a strong interest from a very young child in what is life about, what is the meaning of life, what is there beyond this physical reality. From a young age, I've read books about all sorts of spiritual things. And so to be working with a group of people that were perhaps wanting to answer those questions themselves was something, again, that really interested me. So very quickly, I realised that this was the area that I enjoyed and I wanted to specialise in.
When you started specialising in cancer, at that time, were you already thinking about these early childhood fears of cancer, or is that a realization, a connection you made later?
That came a bit later, to be honest. I think initially I just thought, this is so interesting, and there's so much for me to learn here, and I love that people are really engaged, and I feel I can really make a difference for people. And as I said, there weren't many people doing this work, and so I felt that I could fill a gap. So it was more on that level, really, and that connection, which I don't know when exactly it came about, but it struck me at some point that we're often drawn to those things that we most fear.
Yeah.
Perhaps because on a deep level we want to heal those fears and release them and move through them. And so perhaps that was a deeper reason why I was drawn to work in the cancer field.
Yeah.
But that I realised a bit later.
Mm-hmm. So at this beginning of your career with cancer patients, do you remember how you would have defined what cancer is?
I would have looked at it on a very biochemical level, I think, because I'd done my degree in biochemistry and I'd studied some of the biochemical pathways in cancer. So I would have looked at it very much from the biochemical, physiological point of view. Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I would have looked at it. I fairly early on in my career as a nutritional therapist supporting people with cancer, I studied with the Gerson Institute. They were running a course in the UK for doctors and health practitioners. It was a 5-day residential course, and you became, during that course, very absorbed in the Gerson therapy. We had to do a lot of the practices, the diet, the juices, etc.
Wow.
And that gave me a fresh perspective on what cancer is, because Max Gerson very much looked at cancer as a disease of toxic build-up and how that inhibits the body in many ways at a biochemical level. And I guess I'd probably come across those concepts to a degree before that course, but that really helped me to understand the importance of toxicity in this disease and how vital it is that we are not just putting all the good nutrients into the body, which is what I'd been learning before, but how the other side of the coin, how we take out any toxic rubbish, if you like, that's accumulated is as just as important. You know, you can't have one without the other. You can't just put all the good nutrients in if you're not cleansing the body and clearing it from the toxins. So I think that really opened my eyes, that course, to how vital cleansing and detoxing is with cancer.
But your work now has taken a different turn, and
Yes.
Can you tell the story of when you started to notice that there was maybe a different direction you might want to go with your clients?
Yes. Well, as I said to you, I'd always had an interest in the spiritual side of life and also emotional health and emotional well-being, and had read a lot about spiritual things from a young child growing up, and as I was studying at university and then studying my nutrition, I was always reading a book about healing or past lives, or, you know, I always had a book of that nature going at the same time as all my other studies.
Could you share any notable titles that made a big impression?
There are so many.
Yeah.
I think The Power of Now, which I know is a huge book for many people, Eckhart Tolle, has got to be one of the very important books that I read sort of in earlier times. Gosh, now you're asking me.
We'll do a reading list on the blog post.
I'll carry on thinking about that one and give you more ideas.
That's a good one.
So one thing that I really enjoyed about working with people with cancer was how I could engage with them on an emotional level. And the more I worked with people, the more I realized that while nutrition is so vital, and I would never dismiss it at all, it is essential, what I came to realize was that sometimes it wasn't the top priority in terms of looking at a holistic package for people. I began to realize that sometimes there were other things that were more important that perhaps they should address even before the nutrition. Because coming out of nutrition school, I thought, like most graduates, nutrition is the be all and end all, it's the answer to everything. But I began to realize and this drew on my earlier sort of learning that perhaps emotional well-being and even spiritual well-being was more important sometimes. And the other thing I found was that these restrictive, rigid diets, which the Gerson therapy is, and I think it's an amazing therapy in many ways, but it's very tough to follow, tough to follow. And as I observe, I never actually used, even though I did the training, I never used it in its full capacity with my clients because it felt like it was getting too much into medical territory and I felt a bit out of my depth with it. I did work alongside a doctor who was using it and I felt comfortable in that scenario, but not using it on my own because it does shift the physiology in quite dramatic ways. But I was observing people who were working with this doctor that I supported and other people following very rigid diets that often they may have some initial very significant benefits. And sometimes those benefits, were ongoing. But I found that if people weren't getting the emotional support, particularly because the therapy is so intense, that often the diet wasn't enough to really make a difference to their health. And actually, I did observe relatively often that people deteriorated on these therapies, and it seemed that the stress of following such a harsh program was actually undermining their health rather than supporting it. And that really hit home to me. And I really started to think that nutrition is just one piece of this puzzle. And if a nutritional diet and therapy is going to add a load of stress onto the system, then how can that be the best approach? So that really got me thinking. And the more I engage with my clients and talk to them about some of the deeper issues, and I found myself going there often with clients because they seemed to want to go there. They obviously felt with me that, I was open to talking about these things. So we often went down those tracks when we were talking. And sometimes my consultations did feel more like a therapy session rather than a nutrition session. But I really enjoyed those interactions. And so as I observed more and more over the years how people benefited from talking about and getting support around their emotional health, then I began to think perhaps this is more of the sort of work that I want to do. And I would say that while nutrition was a big interest for me, my greatest passion is emotional and spiritual well-being, and always had been, really. And so I began to think about what further training I could do. And the other thing that maybe pushed me slightly away from nutrition is that the good thing is now people do really understand how important nutrition and healthy diet is for health. And finally, people have accepted, and this is partly because there's been more research, but finally, people have accepted that even in serious illnesses like cancer, changing the diet in a positive way can have huge benefits in terms of recovery. So that's now much more accepted, which is great. But what's happened in the last 10 years, particularly 5 years, is that the new world of nutrition has become more complex. And we've got the development of what's called functional medicine, where it involves a lot of testing of all sorts of biochemical markers and even genetic testing. A lot of therapists are doing that work. But as you start delving deeper and deeper and deeper into the minutiae of people's physiology, it becomes more and more complex. And again, I began to feel sometimes that it was sort of moving into medical territory. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable, especially when you're working with people with serious illness who are often going through complex treatment programs. You have to be extremely careful about what you're doing with supplements. And it is a bit of a minefield. And I'm not saying that nutritional therapists shouldn't delve there, because I think if you are really on top of the research And there are some highly skilled nutritional therapists out there who do this work, and they're really on top of the research and they really know what they're doing. But I was beginning to feel that that wasn't where I wanted to place my energy. And I think you have to put a lot of energy and effort into keeping really up to date with all the research around oncology, nutrition. And so I began to think maybe it's time that I move into the area that interested me even more. I think one of the things that had maybe held me back earlier in my life was the idea that perhaps people are going to think that emotional and spiritual well-being is not scientifically grounded. It's a bit airy-fairy. No one's going to take me seriously. I think that was a part of what stopped me earlier in my life. Whereas nutrition, people were accepting it a lot more. People, could think of it in scientific terms. But in the end, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I started doing further training, and I started off by training with the HeartMath Institute based in America. They do some amazing research looking at the energetic heart and the energy field that the heart creates and how important that is for our whole energy system, and how when the energy of the heart is coherent, as it's called, which basically means that the energy that the heart gives out is, it's quite hard to explain it without going into a lot of physical terms, but it basically means that the energies are aligned and they're flowing well. And when our energy is coherent, it carries a lot of information. And what scientists have discovered at the HeartMath Institute and other institutions, what they've discovered is when the heart energy is coherent, it sends out a lot of information to the rest of the body, and it helps align the energy systems of the rest of the body. So I did this training with the HeartMath Institute and became absolutely fascinated with the heart, because it is an amazing organ, and there's so much that we have forgotten. We knew lots about the heart if you go back to ancient times that we've forgotten now. We obviously understand more about how it is as a physical organ, but we've lost our knowledge around the energetic heart, although we are rediscovering that now. But the other thing that we have lost our knowledge around is the spiritual heart. And this is the area that particularly fascinates me. And our ancestors, our ancient ancestors, understood very well that the heart is the bridge between our physical being and our spiritual being. And by engaging with our spiritual heart, we can connect to the spiritual aspect of who we are. So that was a huge wake-up call for me. And the heart has become the focus of the work that I do now. I still very much work with people with cancer and other serious illness, particularly cancer though. But I'm now focusing on how people can connect to the deepest part of who they are, and that involves connecting with the heart. So that was the first training that I did. I then went on to do various other energy therapies. So I'm sure a lot of your audience have heard of emotional freedom technique, or EFT, which is the tapping, and then something called matrix re-imprinting, which is similar. So the tapping, or EFT, is about releasing energy blockages that have built up in our system. So when we're exposed to challenging encounters during our life, particularly in childhood, if we don't process the emotions that happen in that challenging, stressful situation, then that can leave an imprint on our energy system. And if we never go back and properly process that stress, that imprint can remain with us forever. And those imprints on our energy system can actually disturb the flow of energy in our body and in our energy being. And this can have an impact on our emotional well-being, but also our physical well-being. And this is beginning to be understood more and more now with greater emphasis on the impact of trauma in early life and how that affects people on a physical level and a mental, emotional level later on in life. So with EFT, what you're doing is it's a bit like acupuncture, because you're using the meridian system that comes from traditional Chinese medicine. And rather than using needles to stimulate the acupressure points, you use tapping. So just using your fingers, you tap lightly on different acupressure points around the meridian system. And what that does is that opens up the channels and allows the energy to flow more effectively. And you do that tapping in combination with going back into the emotions related to whatever stressful encounter is coming up and you're working on. And by tapping on those meridian systems as you re-engage with those emotions, it allows the body and the mind and the energy system to fully process that stress that was not fully processed at the time. And by doing that, you lessen those imprints on the energy system and you allow the energy to flow once more. Now, this is very beneficial for people's mental, emotional well-being, but it's also important for physical healing as well, because, as I said, when you've got these energy disturbances, eventually that can lead to physical problems. And I believe that because we are, when you get right down to the crux of it, we are energy beings, I believe that diseases do manifest on an energetic level before we see them on a physical level. And so with this energy work, you're going back to the root, really, and you're clearing those energy blockages that can then have a positive effect on physical health.
So what does it look like, your current practice with a client? How do you bring in, you have so many different bodies of knowledge and different ways that you've worked with people with cancer over the years. So what's your current sort of offering and what does a session look like?
So now my work would be supporting people who are living with cancer, or perhaps it could be a carer who's supporting someone with cancer, or it could be someone that had a diagnosis quite a long time ago and they want to maintain good health. So there's many different scenarios that tap into the whole cancer picture. And it would really be about whatever they're struggling with on an emotional level, then I will support them with that. So it may be directly related to their condition, or it may be something completely unrelated. But whatever emotional baggage they're struggling with, I will help them work through that. I do have a very spiritual perspective that I bring into my work. And so very often with my clients, if they're open to that side of things, we end up talking about spiritual issues and sort of larger perspective on life and what does it all mean. And so I do describe myself as a spiritual coach as well. And so if people want to address that side of things, then I will. And sometimes I'm working with people who have been given a terminal diagnosis. And for those people, reflecting on what may lie beyond this physical reality can be quite important. And they do really want to talk about those sorts of things. And so that comes into it as well. But in terms of the emotional support, it is about dealing with old traumas in the way I've said, using the emotional freedom technique. I mentioned matrix re-imprinting. That is a therapy where it works very well alongside the emotional freedom technique. But that's about, once you've cleared the energies and lessened that imprint, it's about reimagining where you want to go now. So when people are holding a lot of blocked energy and pain from past traumas, then sometimes they can't imagine their future looking positive because they've got a lot of old beliefs and thought patterns that relate to their traumas that are not very healthy and don't allow them to see their life in a positive way. So once we've worked on clearing some of that energy, then we can start to help them to imagine a future and even a present where things are positive. So it's about visualization, it's about reimagining. And I do all of this work, which is not how it always is with therapists doing this work, but I do all of it from the heart center. Because as I said earlier, my work around the heart has shown me that that is the bridge between our physical and our spiritual world. And if we go into our energy center in our inner awareness, then I believe we can connect with the largest part of who we are. And this isn't just my belief, because actually, again, the HeartMath Institute have done some amazing research around this. And this research involves intuition. So if I may just tell you a bit about that, because I think it's really relevant. So there's different types of intuition. Some forms of intuition are actually deep learning. It's deep memories that we've picked up either in this lifetime, but going right back into our ancient history, our brain has been shaped by the experiences our ancestors had. And it means that we've got these memories instilled in our brain. That means if we encounter something, we can tap into those memories and we can act really without having to engage too much thinking. So we will have an almost automatic response because we've got these deep memories inside of us. So that's one form of intuition. But there's another form of intuition that's nothing to do with old memories and the way those have shaped us. So it's not to do with instinct. It's about tapping into the energetic field that lies beyond us as individuals that holds information. So this is called non-local intuition. And to understand it, we have to go back to this idea that everything in our reality is actually energy at the very core, not just physical selves, but everything in our world is ultimately energy. And quantum theory has shown that this is the case. And what scientists and quantum physicists have found is that everything in our reality is made up of energy fields. So there is this energy field that contains information, and this lies beyond our bodies, but we can interact with it. All of our energy fields overlap. And we can tap into this energy field and we can access information that way. And this is what's called non-local intuition. And what researchers have done at the HeartMath Institute is discovered that when we have an insight that comes through this form of intuition, then we actually receive that insight through the heart. And one study that they did, which demonstrated this, was a very interesting study, and it's been replicated several times. So it's not just their work that has shown this, but they got groups of people to sit in front of a computer and they flashed up images very quickly of either something stressful and distressing, or the images were of something lovely, something calming, something feel good, like kittens and puppies. And they measured the response in the individuals. They measured what their brains were doing when they were shown these images, and they measured what their hearts were doing in terms of the neurological and electrochemical signals. And they found, first of all, and this is really quite amazing and even shocking to some people, but what they found is that the body was registering a response even before the images had appeared on the screen. So very difficult for some of us to get our head around this, but there was some sort of pre-sentient response here. So people were anticipating in their body correctly what image, whether stressful or feel good, was going to show up before the image had appeared. So that's one aspect to the research. But the other thing they found was that it was the heart that responded before the brain. So the heart registered in terms of its rhythms and patterns, whether it was a stressful image or a feel-good image. And it registered that before the brain registered anything. So what researchers have concluded from that is that in some way that we don't fully understand yet, but we know that it's to do with the energetic aspect of the heart receives information about our world. And even from this field of information that I've talked about, it receives it before the brain does. And then the signals go to the brain, and it seems like the brain then puts it into a perspective that we can understand. So makes sense of it. The heart picks it up on an energetic level, and then the brain starts to process it and allows our mind to understand it.
And I mean, this
quite
is
a long answer to your question.
It's amazing. I mean, and it's very relatable. I mean, we can all imagine the moment of your heart racing in response to something exciting, or I mean, this is sort of silly, but I think of it like if you're attracted to someone, there's often a heart racing, and maybe there's something you don't like about this person, and your brain says you don't care, but there's like a heart pounding feeling, which is just for a very daily example of.
Well, I think it is relevant to all of us, and just going back to cancer, the one of the things that has struck me often when I'm working with people with cancer is, well, first of all, I would like to say that, and this is a generalization, but I have observed, and I think I know other people have observed as well, because it's been written about, that fairly often people with cancer seem to have been a bit disconnected from what they truly want, and often they've put other people's needs before their own, and they've disregarded what really feels right for them, and they've gone along a path which other people have suggested for them, or life has just meant, we recognize this a lot with mothers with children. We do put our children first, but if we keep on in that pattern of putting others first and neglecting our own well-being and our own needs and our deeper desires, then that's not healthy for us. And I've often observed that pattern in people with cancer, and as I say, I know other people have as well. And so part of my work has been to try and help people reconnect through their intuition and their inner wisdom of what it is that they really want from their life. And often I've found also that people have chosen their cancer treatments not because it was the thing that felt really right to them, but it was because their family were putting on pressure to have a certain treatment, or their doctors were saying it was absolutely necessary and no other options would be suitable. And then I've spoken to people that said, I knew that wasn't the right treatment, but I did it anyway. And I really wish I'd listened to what people will often say my gut was telling me, or my heart was telling me. Our gut also picks up intuitive signals. So I feel that part of a person's recovery is about really tuning in to what they really want from life. And by working with the heart, that's something we can do.
Absolutely. I think I'm still curious in your own practice to hear if you could do like a play-by-play of a session. I'm so curious, Yeah, because I imagine that some of it might be physical, but you probably also begin by talking and hearing about their story. And I'm also curious who you've been working with and how people are finding you.
So every session is different. That's the first thing to say. But you're right that it involves a lot of talking. And when I first meet someone, I really want to hear about their life, not just around what's happened with their cancer, but what is it in their life that really stands out in terms of what's perhaps created a place where, or created a situation where their health has deteriorated to the point of getting cancer. I'll ask questions that I get them to think about, sort of the normal questions that we ask each other. But then I also ask people questions, and I suggest that they don't think about what they're going to say, and they sort of just say what comes into their mind immediately. Because sometimes I think our mind gets in the way, and we start to analyze things, and we think, oh, is that right? Oh, not sure. But sometimes if we just say what comes into our mind without any analysis, that can be very insightful and telling. So I ask people different sorts of questions to really get a sense of when their health started to shift and when they started to feel unwell. So I might ask them, for example, when was the last time you felt truly well, well on every level, emotionally, physically, mentally? And what was it that started to change that? And I might even do a timeline with people so that we can start to work out what occurred when health changes were going on. And then we'll go back very often into what it is in earlier life that's perhaps caused some pain that's still there in some way. And sometimes people come in and they think that they've got a particular issue that they want help with. But as we start to delve into it, we find that there's actually something completely different that's really more of a problem, but they hadn't really realized. And one thing I have to say is that I really do trust the process when I work with people, because I would say I'm quite an intuitive person, and so I follow that intuition, and I just trust that it will unfold in the right way, and it just always seems to. And so, I may also think, oh, I think this person, having a quick chat with them, because I always do an initial sort of half an hour, no obligation to sign up, sort of free chat with people before, and I get a bit of a sense of what's going on for them. And so I may start their initial consultation thinking, okay, it sounds like there's some issues there. But then I also sort of allow it to unfold naturally, and I don't try and control the process too much, because in that space where we're both open and allowing, things come up that you don't always expect. And sometimes they feel like, okay, that's important, that feels like it needs some work. So we'll start off with a chat, and then I do meditation techniques with people just to teach them how to relax their body, how to go into their body and bring their awareness internally. And then we'll almost always go into the heart center by just bringing their attention to the center of their chest, maybe sometimes even placing a hand there, and bringing their awareness to the energy center of the heart. And I think of that heart as a large open space, and every person creates their own beautiful space within their heart. Some people imagine it as a beautiful place in nature. Some people imagine it as a really cozy room somewhere indoors. But I want it to feel like it's somewhere safe. It's somewhere people can completely let go and connect to the essence of who they are. So in those first sessions with people, I'll get them familiar with their heart center. We'll make a space that feels safe. And I'll teach them through breathing techniques and meditation techniques how they can come and connect to that space when they're on their own. Because the work we do in the sessions is important, but I'd like to give people the tools that they can then go away and use these techniques on their own. So we go into the heart space, and then during our conversation, there may have been something that comes up that the individual has said, this feels important to work with now. And so we'll go into the heart space. And at that point, we very often go back in time to when the incident first occurred that they feel is related to whatever pain they're going through now. And the process that I use there, so I don't just jump into the tapping at that point, because this, I think, is a really important point. while the tapping is very useful at clearing some of those energies, I think it's really important to sit with the emotions that occurred at that time and are maybe being triggered now, and just accept what happened rather than trying to move through it too quickly. It's very important to just be with it for a while and to allow the body to integrate those emotions, because very often if something happened when we were quite young, we would have done everything in our power, even if we weren't quite young, everything in our power to push those emotions away and to block them, and we wouldn't have allowed our system to really fully feel them and process them. And that is a very important part of the healing, I believe. So we'll maybe sit with those emotions, and very often we'll do some work with the inner child or the inner younger person, if you like, and we'll talk to that inner child, and we'll allow that inner child to express themselves, to really talk about the emotions they're feeling. Because again, something that's common when children go through traumas, very often they're not given the space, and they don't have an adult there to come down to their level and listen to what they're experiencing. They don't have someone to empathize and feel that pain with them. And that sometimes can be a big part of the trauma. So we go in and we work with the inner child, and we allow that child to express itself and to be heard, to finally be heard and validated. And again, that is a huge part of the healing, I believe. And then we may bring the tapping in to start to clear some of those emotions. And then later on, we'll start to reimagine what that picture looks like now, and how that can be carried forward into the future. So that, in a nutshell, sort of gives you some sense, I guess, of the emotional work that I do with people. But then it sort of takes its own course with different people. We might bring more spiritual side in for some people, others not. But that's more or less how the sessions tend to unfold.
And coming up next month, you'll be participating in a cancer conference called Yes to Life. And so how will you be taking your coaching practice into this conference? What are you speaking, or what's your role there?
So the conference is actually called Finding a Deep Connection. The charity I'm organising it with is Yes to Life. So they're a cancer charity based in the UK that give people the means to access different options with their treatment. So for people who are looking for complementary support with their treatment, they can get some funding from this charity. They're an amazing charity. So I'm working with them, and we're putting on a conference in London at the end of September called Finding a Deep Connection. And just to quickly explain what that's about. So I have felt for a long time that cancer is really a disease of our times, I believe. It's one of the most prevalent chronic degenerative illnesses. And unfortunately, the numbers are still going up and up and up. And despite all the billions of pounds that have gone into the research of cancer over the last few decades, and the massive brain power that's gone into trying to understand cancer, still we're in a situation where cancer rates are going up and up, as I've said. And I feel we need to look at cancer in a different way if we're really going to understand what it is, this disease, and how we can prevent and treat it more effectively. And so my belief is that on a deep level, cancer is about disconnection. And if you look at cancer from a biochemical point of view, then it is very much disconnection, because those renegade cancer cells, they sort of break away from the larger, healthier cellular community, and they sort of go off alone. They're no longer listening to the chemical signals, the energetic signals that are coming in that should keep our cells working together as a whole and working in collaboration and supporting one another. These cancer cells are sort of going it alone. They seem to have their own agenda, and it seems to be against the rest of the body. So this disconnection is happening on a biochemical level. But what I believe is it's also about disconnection on another level, because if you look at the things that seem to be related to cancer, it's all about a moving away from our natural, healthy lifestyle. So toxins in our environment, our air, our water, our food, moving away from healthy, locally grown organic food to processed, factory produced food that, for thousands of years, our bodies were evolved to live on natural, local food. And suddenly we've moved right away from that to heavily processed food. So we're no longer connected to the things that we knew for thousands of years were so vital for our health and well-being. We're disconnected from nature. And the fact that we are in a crisis with our planet right now, with a climate crisis, I think is also reflective of what's happening on an individual level. We've disconnected from nature on an individual level. And so we're somehow allowing ourselves to put these poisons into our body, and we sort of think it's okay and that we're going to still be able to live a long life. We need to wake up from that. And I think cancer is showing us that there is this deep disconnection going on a biochemical, physiological level, but also a deeper level. And I think it goes deeper still, because I think part of that disconnection is a disconnection from spirit. And again, our ancient ancestors lived much more attuned and aligned with the cosmos and with spirit and with the natural cycles of the planets, and we've become so disconnected from that, and I think it's doing great harm to our bodies. So the conference, going back to that, is about how we can reconnect on all levels, but particularly on a spiritual level. And I think there's lots of talk nowadays about how nutrition and exercise and detoxification and the mind and emotional health is important for cancer recovery. But I think the missing element that's still really not being talked about is the spiritual connection. And I believe that that is the most important connection, because when we're connected spiritually, then everything else falls into place. When we understand our place in this world and that we're part of something much greater, and that there is this benevolent force, we can call it life force, that runs through everything in nature. When we're in tune with that and connected with that, then naturally we start eating well, and we start moving our body, and we start putting healthy things into our system. We start having healthier relationships. So everything else falls into place when we have this sense of spiritual connection. But it's still not getting talked about, I don't think, very much. And so the idea of this conference is to bring this issue to the attention of people living with cancer and practitioners working in this area.
It's so exciting, and I think connection, spiritual but also interpersonal, is really why we started this podcast, was about reconnecting. So we'll definitely be sharing the information about your conference. And can people attend virtually? Will there be any broadcasting of the speakers?
So as I understand it, it will be available as a recording later.
Great.
So it's not going to be available as a live virtual conference, but later on it will be available. So,
well, I'll reach out to you and we can share.
We've got some great speakers. Just to say that our keynote speaker is an amazing scientist based at one of the universities here in the UK. His name's Steve Taylor. He's written a brilliant book called Spiritual Science, and he's one of the few scientists that I know that are really talking about how important spirit is in science, and how there's now a lot of research to support that spirit exists, and that it's vital for us to understand the world and for scientists to understand the world. So we've got lots of speakers that are working in this field as practitioners. We've got lots of workshops happening, but then we've got Steve, who's going to give us a real science grounding to it as well. So it's a good mix.
Good. Well, that's our time for today, but thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like there's so much more we could say and so much to the heart.
Yes.
But it was such a wonderful summary, just a taste of your work. So thank you, and maybe we'll continue the conversation in another podcast.
Thank you, Claire. It was a pleasure to share my thoughts, and I hope your audience will enjoy what we had to say. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Write to us at info@cancertalks.com if you have a story to share. If you'd like to be in community with other cancer thrivers seeking personal transformation, join us for free workshops on Zoom. Visit cancertalks.com/Zoom to register. If you're moved to donate, please visit cancertalks.com/donate.